How's it going, everybody? This is Cogent Canine. Welcome to another episode of The Doghouse, episode 2. And today we're going to be talking about what's going on in the world, in the United States, and it's absolutely insane. I feel sorry for the person who has to work 12 hours a day and doesn't have really the opportunity to look at the news and get the whole story. It's impossible almost nowadays to be totally informed. I would have to do just days and days of talking in order to completely capture every single narrative trying to be pushed by people from all around the political spectrum. And where I lie on that political spectrum or that narrative or agenda that's being pushed, I don't completely know. I do know I have certain visceral reactions to things when I see them. I have a certain visceral reaction when I see state power being exercised on those who do not have the same power. I believe that's one of the biggest miscarrying of justice, is to have police take advantage of their power. Now, with that being said, there is obviously people who are attacking police just because they are a police officer. And you have police officers attacking people just because they're the people. And I've seen far too many instances of people attacking the police, and I've seen far too many instances of the police attacking people. And maybe these things are intertwined in a way that I fully don't understand. But I can say that I don't agree with either of them. But I can understand where both are coming from. Now, we're going to take a look at a few stories, and we're going to try to piece some things together here. Now, you might not like some of the things I say, and you might like some of the things I say. The fact is, I'm trying to put all this together just the same as everyone else, but I'm trying to stay somewhat rational about it and not get caught up too much in the frenzy. But it's hard not to when it seems as the United States is burning to the ground and we have a president who doesn't seem to care that it's happening. You have people who don't seem to care about police brutality. You have people who don't seem to care about police being attacked. So without me ranting any further, let's get into it. And let's just start out here with this video right here. This is an example of what I believe is not just bad apples. People talk about cops, just there's a few bad apples. That's true, meaning there are some cops that are going to go way, way overboard and do things that are absolutely criminal. But the fact is, it seems that some of the actions are criminal by the police, even though they're not deemed criminal. The actions that they are allowed to take under the guidelines of which the police are taught are not correct. They are not correct. And I can tell you in these situations, like right here, it is excessive force. Now, I understand, let's start watching the video first.
Hit her, hit her.
And I will say, like I'll say with every video, we do not know what happened before this. Maybe she had a gun, maybe she was pointing it at one of the police. And at that point, if she did have a gun, then what they're doing right now would be justified. But the fact is, if she didn't have a gun and she was simply resisting arrest along these lines, it is excessive. We have full grown men here taking on this small woman and just bashing her, every bit of her body, with batons. Now, are you telling me that one of these police or two of these police could not take this woman to the ground and arrest her without beating her with a baton? Far too many times when someone is resisting arrest, that's all the justification the police need to just kick the shit out of him. Now, you have a lot of people who would justify these actions on the grounds that someone's resisting arrest, but that's exactly the problem that we had with George Floyd. Just because someone's resisting arrest doesn't mean you just get to do whatever you want to them. You still have rights as a citizen, even if you are resisting arrest.
Back up! Back up! Get on the ground.
And then they just push the lady, they just push her over, as we got that 75-year-old man who was pushed over and smacked his head across the concrete. I mean, this lady was just standing there.
Back up! Back up!
Wait.
Back up!
Yeah, she didn't do anything.
Get on the ground.
Someone goes, resist her. Like this is what I'm talking about. I hate it when there is someone who is obviously I could contain by myself. Do you think this lady who is easily pushed over by the police is much of a fighter? She really needs all those grown men on top of her.
Get on the ground.
And look, this guy over here clearly seems to have the situation under control and he doesn't seem to need help. But they're gonna run in anyways. That's the problem. Something that does not take 7 officers. Well, they're gonna use 7 officers even though they don't need them. And this is what people are getting mad at. And hits her with... It's excessive. If you don't think it's excessive, well, I think you might be part of the problem when it comes to thinking that the police can act any way they want because their procedure allows it. The problem is the procedure is wrong, and there needs to be different training that happens. And if not, we're going to continue to get these riots in the streets. If politicians keep talking about a few bad apples and not the system in which we live in. And I'm not talking a racist system. I don't like to play that game. I'm talking a system of government power over the people. Excessive force by the police. And just to lighten the mood as we go into another story. Not a perfect dismount. And look at that bike. My God, the police have the nicest crap. They have the nicest cars, the nicest bikes. Do they really need like a top-of-the-line Trek mountain bike? Are they really doing, cross-country mountain biking where they're going to need all this stuff? Are they really going to chase someone down with their bikes in hot pursuit on their mountain bikes so they need these top-of-the-line $2,000 Trek mountain bikes? I don't think so, but, whatever. And this next video I find completely disgusting, and this is what I'm talking about. This is the attitude of police that people are fed up with. And again, I'll say it, everybody's fed up with it. Many people experience police brutality. This man is not a black man, but I don't think the police gave 2 shits what the color of his skin was as they did this. And he immediately starts bleeding out of his ear. Just immediate. That was not a threat. And again, I'll say this again. The idea that someone is a threat gives them the right to do whatever they want. It's as if when police are trained just to shoot to kill. Police are not trained to be sharpshooters, meaning if someone has a knife and they're 15 feet away and the guy takes a few steps forward, they're going to unload a barrage of bullets into the man, when theoretically they could have just shot the guy in the foot and disarmed him that way. But that's not the way the police are trained. In a situation like this, where clearly this is not a threat, this is an old man who's walking up to them with his COVID mask on, and they just push him out of the way, right? They could have walked past him, theoretically. Could have just walked past him. They didn't need to do that, but they did because they felt they had the right to. And look what happens. He falls over, and they just all casually look at him as they're on their riot gear, as this old man is bleeding, could possibly be bleeding to death. You know, when you smack your head against the concrete, you can die. So it seems to me the way they are going about how they push the man and then casually walk past him as he could be dying is sickening to me. And this is not, you cannot claim that there's a few bad apples in this group. And I'm not claiming that all these people are immoral, evil human beings. What I'm saying is the system in which we live, and I'm not saying systematic racism, I'm saying the system of government power and state power and police power, how they feel they can do these things without any type of consequences. And the consequences I want them to experience is not vigilante justice where we start shooting police in the streets. I don't want to defund the police completely and live in a government without police. But we can also not stand by and be accepting of any type of actions that the police carry out under the justification that someone is resisting or any of the grounds that they'll use to justify their police brutality and their excessive use of force. Now, was the push an excessive use of force? No, I don't think so. But the fact that they casually walk past the man is just...
He's bleeding out of his ear! Get him medic! What the fuck you walking up on me? I'm on the ground!
So, don't render aid to the guy on the ground. Don't check his pulse, or anything like that. Arrest the guy who has a problem with what you just did. Kind of like we just saw in the previous video. They're beating someone with a baton, and this person is like just next to them, and they're allowed to because, well, you're disrupting our investigation. You're too close. You might be a threat yourself. All these guidelines they have in place that allow them to take these actions. There needs to be some way that they can use common sense. There needs to be a way that we, as a police officer, you can use common sense and reason to assess a situation and not just work off some guidelines that are already set in place. Like, oh, there's an old guy in front of my face. He's a threat. I'm allowed to push him. Maybe assess the situation that he's not a threat. He's an old man. And maybe the fact if you push him aggressively, he's old, he might fall over. So that's what I'm mad about, is that people go on just defending every single action of the police based on the fact that someone was resisting. And that's exactly the problem we have with George Floyd.
Back up. Get off the steps. Let's go. Get back.
See, why? You are walking past the street. This person's on a stoop. You just pushed a man over, and he's bleeding out his ear, and you're arresting another person. This person wants the right to film you. They do have the right to film you. We have the right to keep our officers that we pay with our tax money, who work for us, who are servants to the people of the United States. We're allowed to film them, and we're allowed to keep them accountable. And there's too much of this brotherhood inside of the police, the thin blue line where they all protect each other. It's absolutely disgusting. If I was a police officer and I was in any of these situations, let's just say George Floyd, and the guy's on his neck and he said, I can't breathe. Where are the other officers saying, don't do that? The fact is they're afraid to get in trouble with the captain or someone above them. They're afraid to not be liked by their coworkers. So there's lots that goes into how the police think about what they're doing, other than I'm just a public servant out for justice. And if you think that's all that's going through a police's head and they're not human beings, then you're making a huge mistake.
You
better get an ambulance for him. We have EMT on scene.
Just absolutely disgusting. Here's another one where a rubber bullet was fired at someone and they fractured his skull. I believe he's in the hospital. This happened yesterday, I think. And these people rushed to his aid. They're picking him up, trying to carry him over to the police, I think, to help him. And then they start firing upon them. And this is a good time to bring up this idea of non-lethal force. This idea that these devices they use can't be lethal. There was someone who just died in custody yesterday in a jail cell because of pepper spray. What they'll do in situations in jail, let's say someone's acting out inside of a jail cell, they'll close off the door and they'll pepper spray them or something, right? Until they calm down. But the fact is that they'll just spray and pepper spray into these enclosed areas. And the police, I just hate the fact that no one inside the police ever thinks outside their job and goes, wait, this is wrong. This person could die, and this is excessive. Why do we not see more examples of officers standing up to other officers? That should be something that's happening all the time. But it's clearly not, like I said, because there is this idea of the brotherhood inside the police force. Many people have been blinded by these rubber bullets. People who weren't even doing anything, they just got caught up in the crossfire. This idea that, especially tasers by the police aren't just used to stop someone from resisting or to stop a threat. Tasers are supposed to be used in place of a gun to stop a threat and do it in a non-lethal fashion. The way that cops use tasers nowadays is not anything like that. They do it to get compliance. Someone can literally be handcuffed on the ground on their back or on their stomach, and because they try to move over to their back, maybe because their stomach hurts, or they try to get off the side of their arm, maybe they have a bad shoulder, they will taser this person over and over again. And while they're tasering them and they're being shocked and can't stay still because their body's going through spasms, they'll scream to them, "Stay still, stop resisting." I love this one too. They'll sick a police dog on someone. The dog is mauling someone's leg and they'll be like, "Stop resisting." And it's your human nature to try to defend yourself in these situations, but they ask you to go against your human nature and lie face down in the concrete with your hands behind your back as you're either being mauled by a police dog or tased.
Raw video like this is changing public perception of police dogs. Here, police in St. Paul, Minnesota use a canine unit, a dog and a handler, to apprehend Frank Baker. Baker's an African-American man who was identified, mistakenly, as a criminal suspect.
Well, what I was hearing was, get out the car with your hands up and walk toward us. So I walked toward them, and I took like about 7 or 8 steps. And they said, turn around. As soon as I turned around, he let the dog out on me. And the dog just started biting me and just tearing me up. That dog, he made me a cripple, deformed all my life. I can't dance no more. I can't play sports no more. I can't run. That's all. My whole life, I was playing football and ran track and did things. I can't do that no more. I can't do it. I love dogs all my life. Now, I fear dogs.
Cut that in. Good boy.
And the crazy part in these situations is that the crime that was the person initially resisted could be a very, very small crime. Let's just say, selling loose cigarettes. And then 7 police officers will tackle someone and then start to choke them out when they could just talk to them. Police are not good at de-escalating situations. And I'll say it again, it's because they're not trained to. So this idea that's going around that all cops are evil is stupid, but also the idea that it's just a few bad apples. And I'm not saying that they're all bad apples and they're all evil people, but the way they're trained is not good. We need different procedures. We need different training. We need de-escalation training, not just this idea that someone's a threat and we're going to use every single means, in our power to stop that threat, even though it's a 75-year-old man, even though it's a small woman, even though someone is handcuffed and have their hands behind their back, and you're still going to put your knee in their neck because they're squirming a little bit. Stop resisting as they're squirming. You have the situation completely under control, but because the person squirms a little bit, you're going to punch him in the face or you're going to tase them. It's absolutely ridiculous, and people are fed up with it. Also, I'm not doing this in any order. I've been posting lots of things over the last few days, and I'm just scrolling through my timeline. And as I see things, I'm talking about them. So here's another one. Pat Robertson tells Trump that his response to George Floyd protest isn't cool. And when we have Pat Robertson coming out and saying these things, I think that says something.
You know, there's a purpose of everything under heaven we read in the Bible. And there's a time, and it seems like now is the time to say, I understand your pain. I want to comfort you. I think it's time we love each other. But the president took a different course. He said, I am the president of law and order. And he issued a heads up. He said, I'm ready to send in military troops if the nation's governors don't act to quell the violence that has rocked American city. Matter of fact, he spoke of them as being jerks. You just don't do that, Mr. President. It isn't cool. You know, there's a purpose.
Yeah, well, when has Donald Trump ever cared about the nation, ever cared about other people? I've talked many times about how Trump is a narcissist and only cares about himself and cares about his image and cares about being reelected. He cares about optics. And I don't know if there's a moral bone in that man's body with the way he has acted his entire life. And that leads us into this story about how Donald Trump, I don't know if you guys saw this, but people were peacefully protesting outside of the White House. I believe this was yesterday or the day before. And in order to give a speech to the nation, instead of doing it from the White House, where, you know, you could have done it from the White House and you could speak to the nation directly. And hell, you could even apologize to the nation for being such an asshole this entire time. Because a lot of this unrest is because of Donald Trump. He has been dividing this nation from day one. Okay, fake news, constantly attacking anybody who has the slightest criticism of him. The fact is, people who don't criticize Trump at this point are a part of a cult. If you have nothing to say about the way the president acts, just in the way he carries himself, then you're probably the guy who carries yourself exactly like him. And when you're justifying Trump acting this way, you're justifying yourself acting that way. And I'll just read this. Instead of addressing the nation from the White House and trying to sympathize with the protesters like a true leader, Donald Trump decides to flex his power and unnecessarily give his speech at the church across the street an excuse to disperse the protesters. And that's exactly what it was. He could have given the address from the White House, but he decides to go across the street to justify dispersing peaceful protests because he's allowed to do that if the president's coming through and he's got to get across the street. Well, then he's legally allowed to do that. But that's called, hey, everybody, look at my big swinging nuts. Hey, everybody, look how much I'm flexing my power. Or as that religious guy just said, I'm the president of law and order. We need a president that comes out, and even if he doesn't completely agree with the unrest or completely agree with lots of the demands, he needs to speak like a leader. And stop stoking the fire and stoking the flames. But that's exactly what he's doing. It's as if I can cause enough chaos, then my base will look at all these riots and be like, oh, we definitely need another term of President Trump. Absolutely ridiculous. This is, I think I've said enough about Trump. Trump is an asshole who does not care about anybody other than himself. And like I said, I'm just going through this timeline, so you might think that I'm just going to continue talking about police brutality and how I don't like Donald Trump, but I'm also going to say that this is absolutely ridiculous. David Dorn, he was an ex-cop protecting his business, and he was gunned down. He is dead now, just simply because he was trying to protect his livelihood and his business. And do you call that justice for George Floyd? Do you call more people dying justice for anybody? No, I don't think so. And it's completely okay to be for peaceful protests, to be for change, and not to be for revolution. I feel a lot of people have this idea that it's all or nothing, and one extreme needs to bring about another extreme, and I just don't think that's the best way to go about it. Rioting and destroying cities across the country is not going to get justice for George Floyd, and I don't think it's going to get any reform, especially with this president. If anything, it's going to get more restrictions. If anything, it's going to bring in the military police. If anything, it's going to bring about more authoritarian laws that give more power to the police, given the president and Republicans can justify it based on the fact that people are rioting and we continue to have unrest all across the country as police are being attacked, as businesses are being destroyed. And while I can sympathize with the unrest and I can say that things have gotten to a boiling point, I'm still not going to justify any of these actions. Like I had said previously, in the video that I made about TJ that got disliked a bunch, this is what I was concerned about. Just willy-nilly saying, let's burn things down, will get things burnt down and people killed in the process. So while I am completely against police brutality, I'm also against this ex-cop being brutalized himself. And also, these stories aren't covered very much by the mainstream media. What the mainstream media does is constantly provoke people and present a narrative, one side of the narrative. That's why I was saying earlier, it is hard to be an informed person. It's hard to know exactly the whole entire scope of a situation and all the details of it. And far too many times the media is presenting this as a white versus black issue. They're presenting it as a white officers versus black people issue. And as we saw earlier, I don't think the police very much care what the color of your skin is. This is a class issue. This is about how we police the vulnerable and we take advantage of those who don't know their rights and who don't have the means or wealth to fight these injustices in court. And I'm all for the peaceful protests. I'm all for kneeling outside of the White House to show contempt for the president. But I'm not for looting for the sake of justice or rioting. And again, I'm not claiming that's all the protesters. I make a distinction between protesters and rioters. But if you're okay with the rioting and the attacks on police because you're justifying that through the basis of, well, police brutality and, well, this has been going on for a long time, so it's okay that we revolt in this fashion. Maybe it would be true if we were living in Saudi Arabia that this might be more justified, but the fact is we're not. And a lot of the police who are being attacked don't deserve it themselves. And we cannot take people as a whole, like all of police, all of white people, all of black people. When did we get away from this idea that we see people as individuals and we judge based on their character, not their skin color? That seems to be a lost idea with a lot of people on Twitter. It's all or nothing. Either the police are completely fine or we need to get rid of the police altogether. At least that's the people on Twitter. And I'll say again, I don't know if that's everybody in the world. It's hard to get an understanding of what's actually going on, given all these different competing narratives. And stuff like this is completely unnecessary, and it shows how huge corporations, they don't care. They will say anything that they think they need to. If they feel that the nation is acting one way and thinking one way, well, then that's what they're going to give the nation. But if tomorrow we were in solidarity with police and we were saying, you know, let's stop killing police or something like that, that's what they would be doing. That's what Apple would be doing. But Apple Music joins Blackout Tuesday by pausing browse function. The show must be paused. Black Lives Matter. And while Black Lives do matter, I'll say I think this is more of a class issue. And I think you can see that if you look deep enough and not just at the surface level of what the mainstream media is trying to make this out to be. I will say it till I'm blue in the face. This is a class issue. This is about authoritarianism and injustices by the people who hold power and are supposed to wield that power responsibly. That's what this is about. And what happens is when we make it about race, you're not going to get a lot of white people on board saying Black Lives Matter. And Black Lives Matter is a movement against police brutality, but the fact is lots of white people experience police brutality and are not going to be on board with the fact that just Black Lives Matter when we're looking at it in context of police brutality. Because obviously all lives matter in that context, right? And I'm just not on board with the idea that white people are just let off the hook when it comes to crime. Like if you get pulled over and you're white, the white officer just gives you a fist bump and says, well, you be on your way. Obviously your skin color is white. I don't know why I pulled you over to begin with. This idea that white people are just off the hook for crime, or they aren't policed. Poor neighborhoods like trailer parks. You know, has anybody ever heard of white trash before? Like trailer parks in those neighborhoods aren't policed a lot, and police brutality and injustices don't occur in those neighborhoods. They do. That's why just going about hashtag Black Lives Matter does divide a nation. And I think we're seeing that right now. If we could look at this through the lens of state power and injustice, then I think we're going to get ourselves a lot further down this road than if we do it along racial lines. And you can disagree with me all you want, but that's what I think. And that doesn't mean I'm a racist. That just means I'm trying to figure out the best way to combat this issue. Multiple music streaming services joined the Blackout Tuesday movement by amplifying and celebrating black musicians. Apple Music completely paused its browsing function and instead presented listeners with a message of solidarity and a link to their Beats One radio program that features songs of black empowerment. So let me get this straight. Apple Music just didn't let you search for anything other than the playlist they provided to you, and that somehow everyone listening to black artists is going to stop police brutality? No, it's not. It's absolutely ridiculous. These shots in the dark by companies where they're just like, oh, well, we better do something. We better be one of the first companies that gets out in front of this and says something, because if we don't, we'll be accused of just following people's lead and not really caring. So we better get out and do this. You don't think there's boards of people who are micromanaging the way that they're presented to the public? They are. And if you think every one of these board members or stockholders gives a shit, well, then you're sadly mistaken. Just because for a day they say Black Lives Matter and they don't let you search their music means they care somehow? No, that's called optics. Again, that's called optics. And here's another dumb one. The murder of George Floyd was the result of inhuman police brutality that is perpetrated by a culture of white supremacy. Here we go again. And where a white guy might have been on board, he's now not on board, because he was like, yeah, the police brutality is bullshit. There's injustices everywhere. They are abusing their power. And then they read that Ben and Jerry's thinks it's because of a culture of white supremacy. Then you're going to have a person step back and go, well, wait, I don't think we live in a white supremacist nation, but I do believe there's a problem with police brutality. When we interlink these two, we divide. And if you can't see that by now, look a little bit deeper into this issue. Because here's something you're not going to see in the mainstream media. You simply will not see this as a nationwide story. But if the roles were reversed, it would be a nationwide story, and there might be protests everywhere in the nation because of it.
He's calling the police! Somebody get him!
Oh, hell no. They about to get on his ass. Oh, Lord!
As you punch that guy and he falls to the ground, justice for George Floyd, my ass. And it's because of the media saying that black communities are affected by police brutality and they keep killing black people, while not sharing that actually white people are killed more by police. Not at the same per capita ratio, but just as far as dead bodies on the ground, more white people are killed by police. So if you keep talking about one side and not the other, you will get people thinking that it's just white people against black people and not police against people. And then you get shit like this. And then you get no one talking about it, because if you do, you just might be seen as racist. But the thing is, I'm not going to justify any violence by anybody under any means, unless you actually live in an authoritarian nation, like you live in Saudi Arabia or somewhere in the Middle East, where you're actually starting your first revolution, right? We've had our revolution. We've also had civil rights movements. And to pretend that we're somehow in the midst of Jim Crow, while racism still exists, to pretend that we're in the midst of Jim Crow, or this is the most racist time in American history, is a lie. And it's misleading, and it's misinformation. And this idea that we just need to burn everything down to start over is not true. We can do this thing pragmatically.